Welcome to Mind Sherlock, where every case challenges your intellect, every clue sharpens your instincts, and every mystery pulls you deeper into the unknown. Grab a seat, stay sharp, and let's unravel the truth together. Chapter 1. The Unsettling Funeral. The air was thick with the damp chill of an autumn afternoon as the mourners gathered around the open grave. Hercule Poirot, standing beside his ever-loyal companion, Captain Hastings, observed the scene with a mixture of detachment and curiosity. The deceased, Albert Frobisher, had been a wealthy but reclusive man, and his funeral reflected the estrangement that had defined his later years. The faces around them were sombre, but Poirot noted a distinct lack of grief. Not quite the weeping and wailing one might expect for a man of his fortune, Hastings murmured, adjusting the brim of his hat against the drizzle. Poirot's sharp gaze flicked over the assembled figures. Edwin Frobisher, the younger brother, stood stiffly at the front, his jaw set in a firm line. Beside him, a woman in her late 40s, Miss Langley, the housekeeper, clutched a handkerchief but shed no tears. A smattering of distant relatives and business acquaintances completed the group, their eyes either downcast or drifting elsewhere. Grief, mon ami, Poirot murmured, is not always accompanied by tears. But tell me, what do you make of our chief mourner, Monsieur Edwin? Hastings glanced toward Edwin. He looks composed enough. Reserved, perhaps. Poirot nodded, but his expression was unreadable. He had already noticed a peculiar rigidity in the man's posture, as though the occasion were an inconvenience rather than a loss. The priest's voice rose above the rustling leaves. Earth to earth, ashes to ashes, dust to... A sudden cry rang out, piercing the air like a dagger. A frail, elderly woman at the edge of the crowd swayed, her face blanching, and then collapsed onto the damp ground. Gasps rippled through the mourners as two men bent to assist her. Her voice, weak but desperate, rasped through the hush. That man in the coffin, it is not Albert Frobisher. The words struck like a thunderclap. A murmur of shock and disbelief swept through the gathering, heads turning, eyes widening. Edwin Frobisher took a step forward, his face darkening with barely restrained anger. "This is madness," he said sharply. "My brother is dead, and he lies before us. Someone take this woman home. She is clearly confused." Poirot, however, moved forward, kneeling beside the distressed widow. "Madame, you say this is not Albert Frobisher." His voice was gentle, yet there was an unmistakable sharpness to his tone, like a scalpel slicing through the fog of uncertainty. The woman clutched at his arm. "I have known Albert since he was a boy. I saw him last year before he fell ill. And this is not him." A few awkward chuckles came from the mourners, an attempt to dispel the unease settling over the funeral like an unwanted guest. "I am sorry, madame, but you must be mistaken," Edwin said, his voice forced into calmness. "This is my brother, identified by myself and the doctor." Poirot rose, brushing dirt from his trousers. His expression remained unreadable, but Hastings, who knew that look well, felt a prickle of unease. "A strange mistake, no?" Poirot murmured. "Or perhaps not a mistake at all." The murmuring had not yet settled when Poirot's gaze landed on the undertaker, a tall, thin man with a receding hairline. He stood a few paces from the grave, gripping his hat as though it might anchor him to the earth. His fingers twitched, his eyes flicking toward the coffin. Poirot approached him with careful steps. "Monsieur, I wonder if you might ease the good lady's mind. Surely you can confirm beyond doubt that this is indeed Albert Frobisher." The undertaker hesitated, licking his lips. "Of course, Monsieur Poirot. Mr. Frobisher's body was prepared with the utmost care. There can be no doubt." "No doubt at all?" Poirot's voice was light, almost amused. The undertaker shifted on his feet. "People in grief sometimes misremember faces, you understand. The passage of time, illness. It can change a man's appearance. Poirot nodded, but his sharp eyes had already caught the contradiction. The widow had claimed to see Albert only last year, hardly long enough for such drastic change. He let the moment stretch, watching as the undertaker avoided his gaze. Bien, Poirot said at last. I am sure everything is in order. The undertaker relaxed slightly. But Poirot had seen enough. As the ceremony concluded and the crowd began to disperse, Poirot remained by the graveside, his gaze lingering on the coffin. Hastings, now accustomed to Poirot's habit of absorbing details unnoticed by others, waited patiently. "Well, Poirot?" he asked at last. Poirot tapped a finger against his chin. "Curious, mon ami. Very curious indeed." "What is?" "This coffin. It is larger than necessary, almost as if it was built for a man of different proportions." Hastings frowned. "But surely that means nothing." Poirot smiled slightly. "Perhaps. And yet, our anxious undertaker, he seemed rather too eager to dismiss the widow's claim." He paused. "Tell me, Hastings, when you observed the body in the open casket before burial, what did you notice?" Hastings hesitated. Well, to be frank, I wasn't paying much attention." Poirot tutted. "Ah, mon cher Hastings, the details, always the details, and the greatest detail of all." His voice lowered. "A man who dies of illness should show signs of it, non?" Realization dawned on Hastings. "You mean—" Poirot gave a small, satisfied nod. "Yes, Hastings. I believe our dearly departed Albert Frobisher may not have been quite so dead after all." A silence settled between them, thick with the weight of the mystery. Then, as if on cue, a funeral attendant came running toward them, his face pale. "Sir, Monsieur Poirot, something terrible has happened." Poirot turned, his expression sharp. "Speak, mon ami." The man swallowed hard. "The grave. It has been disturbed. The coffin is empty." Poirot's lips pressed together in a thin line. He glanced at Hastings, his eyes glinting with quiet triumph. "Ah," he murmured. "Now the game begins." That evening, as the heavy London rain drummed against the windows of Poirot's modest yet impeccably arranged lodging, Hastings stirred his tea with a contemplative frown. "A peculiar business, Poirot," he mused. "That widow, she seemed utterly convinced. And yet surely a family member would know best." Poirot, seated with his customary precision, did not immediately respond. His fingers traced an invisible pattern on the polished wood of his desk. His silence was not one of distraction, but of careful consideration. At that moment, the doorbell rang. Hastings set his cup down and went to answer it. A boy, no more than 12, stood in the entrance, his cap dripping with rain. Without a word, he thrust a small, unmarked envelope into Hastings' hand and vanished into the night. Hastings shut the door, brow furrowed. "What's this?" Poirot extended a hand, taking the envelope delicately. He slit it open with his paper knife and withdrew a single sheet of paper. The message, written in jagged, uneven script, sent a chill through the room. "A dead man walks. Find the truth before the second burial." For a moment, neither spoke. Then Hastings let out a nervous chuckle. "Good Lord, Poirot, this is absurd." "Non, mon ami," Poirot said quietly, eyes glinting. "It is not absurd. It is precise." He tapped the paper. "A dead man walks. Someone believes that Albert Frobisher was not only wrongly buried, but perhaps not dead at all when he went into the ground." Hastings shuddered. "That's ghastly." Poirot rose, placing the letter on his desk with deliberate care. "It is, as you say, most unsettling. And yet, I have found that the truth, when revealed, is often more terrible than our imaginations allow." A sharp knock at the door interrupted them. This time, it was no messenger boy, but a gravedigger from Brompton Cemetery, his face pale and damp with sweat. "Mr. Poirot," the man stammered, removing his cap. "There's something wrong at the burial site. Something unnatural. The cemetery was deserted, save for the lone figure of the gravedigger, who led Poirot and Hastings through the winding paths. Their lantern flickered, casting long, wavering shadows across the headstones. "It was about an hour ago," the man whispered. "I was finishing up near the mausoleum when I saw movement by Mr. Frobisher's grave. A dark figure, someone digging." Hastings let out a low whistle. "Grave robbers." Poirot shook his head. "Grave robbers seek valuables, mon ami. But what if they sought something else?" They approached the burial site. The air was thick with the damp scent of disturbed earth. The mound over the coffin was uneven, fresh clumps of soil scattered around. The gravedigger hesitated, glancing nervously at Poirot. "I didn't dare get closer, sir, but I tell you, I heard something. A scraping sound, like the coffin lid being pried open." Poirot stepped forward, his sharp eyes scanning the ground. Then he crouched, pressing a gloved hand against the disturbed soil. A faint line, a mark of forced entry, was visible along the edges of the grave. "Mon Dieu," Poirot whispered. "It is worse than I feared." Hastings swallowed. "What do you mean?" Poirot stood, brushing the dirt from his fingers. "The widow's claim was not simply the error of an old woman, Hastings. Someone buried in this grave did not belong there, and now someone has come to retrieve them." Poirot signaled to the gravedigger. "Fetch a spade, mon ami. We must confirm what I already suspect." Minutes later, under the dim glow of the lantern, they worked in tense silence, unearthing the coffin. When they reached it, Hastings, breathless, hesitated before placing his hands on the lid. Poirot gave him a curt nod. "Open it." With a deep breath, Hastings pried it open. The creaking of the wood echoed in the night air. Then he froze. The coffin was empty. Hastings staggered back. But that's impossible." Poirot's expression was grim. "Impossible? Non, mon ami. But most certainly chilling." He gestured at the disturbed grave. "Someone went to great lengths to remove this body before we could uncover the truth." Hastings could only stare. "Poirot? Where is Albert Frobisher?" Poirot steepled his fingers, his eyes narrowing. "That, Hastings, is the question upon which this entire mystery turns. But one thing is now certain. Albert Frobisher's funeral was merely the first act of a far greater deception." The cold wind howled through the trees as the three men stood by the empty grave, the weight of a vanished corpse pressing down on them like the silence of the dead. Chapter 2. The Man Who Should Be Dead. The Frobisher estate loomed before them, its grand facade untouched by time, yet somehow carrying the weight of its owner's absence. The drive leading up to the house was lined with perfectly manicured hedges, a stark contrast to the oppressive silence that seemed to shroud the place. Poirot and Hastings stepped out of the car, their footsteps crisp against the gravel path. A butler, rigid with formality, led them through the dimly lit halls toward the drawing room, where Edwin Frobisher awaited them. Edwin, a man in his early 40s, stood near the fireplace, one hand resting against the mantel. His face, lean and sharp, bore no trace of grief, only a restrained impatience. "Messieurs," he greeted, his tone clipped, "I assume you've come regarding that unfortunate disturbance at my brother's funeral." Poirot inclined his head. "Indeed, Monsieur Frobisher. A most intriguing business, non?" "There is nothing intriguing about it," Edwin replied stiffly. "A woman in shock, a case of mistaken identity, nothing more. My brother is dead, and he was buried accordingly." Poirot's expression remained unreadable. "Even so, I find myself most curious. Tell me, mon cher, when last did you see your brother alive?" Edwin's eyes flickered, a brief hesitation masked with cool indifference. "A week before his passing," he answered. "He was gravely ill. There was no doubt about his condition." Poirot's gaze lingered on him for a moment before he murmured, "No doubt at all, monsieur." "How fortunate for you." Edwin moved toward the decanter on the side table, pouring himself a drink with steady hands. "I understand there has been speculation," he said. But I assure you, my brother was dead before we laid him to rest. The doctor certified it. I saw the body myself. Hastings, standing beside Poirot, crossed his arms. Then how do you explain the widow's claim? A woman in her 80s with failing eyesight and a mind prone to confusion. Edwin scoffed. I hardly think that requires explanation. She was simply mistaken. Poirot nodded slowly. Perhaps. And yet, there is the matter of the anonymous letter, n'est-ce pas? A dead man walks. A most unusual jest, if it is indeed a jest. Edwin's grip on his glass tightened, but he maintained his composure. People invent all sorts of nonsense when a wealthy man dies. Sensationalism, inheritance disputes, baseless rumours. I won't entertain them. Poirot studied him for a long moment. You are most certain, then, that your brother was in that coffin? Beyond doubt, Edwin said firmly, and I would appreciate it if this matter was laid to rest, just as my brother was. Poirot smiled thinly. Laid to rest. Ah, how I wish that were true, Monsieur Frobisher. A soft cough at the doorway drew their attention. Miss Langley, the housekeeper, stood with her hands clasped, her face pale and tense. Forgive me, sir, she said to Edwin. I thought perhaps Mr. Poirot might wish for some tea. Poirot turned to her with interest. Ah, Mademoiselle Langley, you were in service to Monsieur Albert, yes? She nodded quickly. Yes, sir, for nearly 10 years. Poirot observed her carefully. Her eyes darted toward Edwin before settling on the tray she carried, as if afraid to meet his gaze. A woman with secrets, Poirot thought. He gestured for her to set the tray down. Tell me, mademoiselle, Poirot continued, his voice deceptively light. How was Monsieur Albert in his final days? She hesitated. He was unwell, of course, but he still worked, still kept to himself. Kept to himself? Poirot echoed. How interesting. And yet, one might expect a man near death to seek comfort. None. Miss Langley's hands trembled slightly. Edwin spoke before she could answer. I don't see how this is relevant, he said curtly. Miss Langley, that will be all. Poirot gave her a reassuring glance. Mademoiselle, if you recall anything that may be of importance, you will tell me, yes. For the briefest moment, she seemed on the verge of speaking, but with a glance at Edwin, she simply bowed her head. Yes, sir, she murmured before retreating. Poirot sighed. Such loyalty, he mused. And yet, loyalty to whom? Minutes later, the family lawyer, Mr. Alistair Graves, arrived. A meticulous man with wire-rimmed glasses, he carried himself with the air of someone who had seen far too many disputes among the wealthy. Mr. Poirot, Graves said, adjusting his spectacles, I understand you have questions regarding the late Mr. Frobisher's affairs. Indeed, Monsieur Graves, Poirot replied smoothly, though my greatest question, I think, may lie not in his affairs, but in his past. Graves cleared his throat. Yes. Well, there is something you should know. Mr. Frobisher had been declared legally dead once before. Hastings gaped. Declared dead? Edwin, who had been composed until now, suddenly turned rigid. You weren't supposed to discuss that. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Ah, but now you must, Monsieur Graves. Please enlighten me. Graves hesitated, then spoke. 3 years ago, Mr. Albert Frobisher was presumed drowned in a shipwreck. The authorities found wreckage, but no body. After due process, he was declared deceased, and Mr. Edwin inherited the estate. Poirot's fingers drummed against his chin. Yet, as we know, Monsieur Albert was very much alive. Tell me, Monsieur Edwin, was it not inconvenient to have a brother return from the dead when one has already taken his place? Edwin's jaw tightened. That is absurd. Graves, flustered, continued. Mr. Frobisher had to fight to reclaim his wealth. There were legal battles, of course, but eventually everything was restored to him. Poirot tilted his head. Except peace. Non. Silence fell over the room. Poirot tapped his fingers thoughtfully. A man declared dead once, he murmured, and now buried again. But what if this time it was not Albert Frobisher who went into that grave at all? Edwin rose abruptly. I've had enough of this. My brother is dead. If you wish to chase shadows, Mr. Poirot, do it elsewhere. Poirot remained seated, his expression unreadable. Oh, Monsieur Frobisher, he said softly, I do not chase shadows. I follow footprints, and yours, I think, are leading somewhere most intriguing. Edwin turned sharply on his heel and left. Hastings exhaled, shaking his head. A shipwreck, legal battles, now a second death. What do you make of it, Poirot? Poirot straightened his cuffs. Mon ami, I make of it a mystery, and mysteries, as you know, do not rest until they are solved. Poirot sat with meticulous posture in the records office, his fingers tapping lightly on the polished wooden desk, as the clerk sifted through stacks of documents. Hastings, less patient, leaned forward. Are you quite sure about this, Poirot? Albert Frobisher was a wealthy man. Why on earth would he keep a secret apartment in Soho? Poirot steepled his fingers. Mon ami, when a man has secrets, he does not hide them in plain sight. He buries them, far from the eyes of those who believe they know him. The clerk finally returned, placing a slim file before Poirot. There you are, sir. Rented under the name Arthur Fields, but the payment traces back to Mr. Frobisher's accounts. Poirot's eyes gleamed as he skimmed the details. A most interesting alias, Hastings. Arthur Fields. Albert F. Hastings let out a low whistle. So he was living a double life. But why? And what was he hiding there? Poirot closed the file with a quiet snap. That, mon cher, is precisely what we must discover. An hour later, they stood before a narrow, unremarkable door in the heart of Soho. Poirot turned the key, stepping inside. The air was stale, the room eerily still, a life kept in secret, preserved in dust. Poirot's gaze swept the room. Albert Frobisher was not simply hiding here. He was preparing for something. The question is, was it escape or something far more sinister? Poirot moved with careful precision, his hands brushing lightly over the desk, the bookshelves, the writing table. Hastings, less delicate in his approach, opened drawers with brisk efficiency. There's nothing much here, Poirot, just the usual, a few bills, some letters, and… He stopped abruptly, lifting a single sheet of paper. Wait a moment, this looks unfinished. Poirot took the letter, his eyes scanning the words with growing intensity. The handwriting was hurried, the ink slightly smudged. I have been a fool. I see that now. There is no one I can trust, not even… The sentence trailed off. Poirot traced the page with a gloved finger. He stopped writing abruptly. Why? Hastings frowned. Who was he about to name? Poirot folded the letter with care. Someone close to him, mon ami. Someone he had trusted implicitly, until the moment he realized his mistake. Hastings shifted uneasily. Do you think he was planning to run? Poirot's expression darkened. Perhaps. Or perhaps he knew that running would not be enough. He glanced around once more. Albert Frobisher feared for his life. But fear, Hastings, is not always enough to save a man. Then Poirot's gaze landed on the floor, and he stilled. Hastings, he murmured, bring me the lamp. The flickering lamplight cast long shadows as Poirot crouched, pressing a handkerchief lightly against the floorboards. He lifted it, revealing a dark smear. Hastings swallowed. That's blood, Poirot confirmed. And not old, Hastings. Fresh. Hastings glanced around, his voice lowering instinctively. So what does that mean? Poirot stood slowly, his eyes unreadable. It means, mon ami, that Albert Frobisher did not simply disappear. He was taken. A pause. Then, with quiet finality, he added, and I fear he did not leave this place alive. The room, already silent, seemed to grow even colder. Chapter 3. The Witness in the Shadows. The bar was a dimly lit affair, tucked between narrow streets that whispered secrets with the wind. Poirot and Hastings stepped inside, the scent of tobacco and stale beer lingering in the air. The bartender, a burly man with sleeves rolled to his elbows, polished a glass absent-mindedly as they approached. "You're the detective, then?" he asked, his voice roughened by years of drink and smoke. Poirot inclined his head. "Oui, monsieur. I believe you have information regarding Monsieur Albert Frobisher." The bartender's eyes darted toward the door, as if gauging who might be listening. Then, lowering his voice, he said, "I saw him." Hastings stiffened. "You saw Albert Frobisher after his funeral?" The man nodded. "Clear as day. He came in 2 nights ago, sat in that very corner." He gestured toward a shadowed booth. Didn't say much, looked anxious, like a man with the devil at his back. Poirot studied him carefully. "And you are quite certain, monsieur?" "There is no possibility of a mistake." The bartender set the glass down with a dull thud. "I've worked here long enough to remember faces, sir. I'd swear on it." Poirot exchanged a glance with Hastings. If the bartender spoke the truth, then Albert Frobisher had indeed walked among the living after his own burial. But truth, Poirot knew, was a fragile thing, easily warped by fear. A heavy silence settled over them before the bartender exhaled sharply, rubbing his temple. "Wait," he muttered. "Maybe I've got it wrong." Hastings frowned. "Got it wrong? You just said—" "I know what I said," the man interrupted. "But now that I think about it, maybe it was someone who just looked like him. The light's bad in here, and he kept his head down. It could have been my mistake." Poirot's gaze sharpened. "Or perhaps you have suddenly remembered that dead men do not leave taverns, and that frightens you." The bartender swallowed hard, his eyes flicking toward the entrance once more. Poirot leaned in slightly. "Someone has warned you to forget what you saw, n'est-ce pas?" The man hesitated, then shook his head, forcing a laugh. "No one's warned me about anything. Maybe I just imagined it. That's all." Poirot sighed, straightening. "Très bien, monsieur. If memory should become clearer, you will inform me, yes?" The bartender gave a jerky nod, but Poirot knew better. Fear was a ruthless persuader, and someone had made certain this man feared speaking the truth. The Remington residence was an elegant but aging townhouse, its grandeur dulled by the passing years. A man in a well-tailored suit opened the door, his silver hair slicked back with meticulous care. "Mr. Poirot, I presume." His voice was smooth, but there was a sharpness beneath it. "I was told you might be calling." Poirot inclined his head. "Monsieur Remington, your reputation precedes you." Remington gestured toward the sitting room. "I'm afraid I don't have much time for pleasantries, gentlemen. What is it you wish to ask?" Poirot seated himself with his usual precision. "Monsieur Albert Frobisher. You knew him, did you not?" Remington's expression remained neutral. "We were acquainted." Poirot's gaze did not waver. "Acquainted enough that he entrusted you with certain business dealings, oui?" A flicker of something crossed Remington's face. "Albert was involved in many ventures, Mr. Poirot. I wouldn't presume to know all of them." Poirot smiled slightly. "Ah, but one name stands out. Victor Lassalle." The air in the room shifted. Remington stiffened, the practiced indifference slipping for the briefest moment. "I don't know what you mean," he said curtly. Poirot merely watched him. Remington sighed, standing abruptly and pouring himself a drink. "Albert was foolish," he muttered. "He got in too deep." Hastings leaned forward. "In too deep with whom?" Remington swirled the liquid in his glass, his voice low. "With a man who doesn't forgive debts or betrayals. Victor Lassalle." The name settled like a cold weight in the room. Remington downed his drink, setting the glass down with a quiet thud. "You don't want to go sniffing around Lassalle, Mr. Poirot." Poirot adjusted his cuffs. "Ah, but I fear I already am." Remington exhaled sharply. "Then you'd best tread carefully. LaSalle isn't just some criminal. He's a force, a shadow that moves where it pleases, leaving nothing but ruin behind. Hastings frowned. And you believe Albert Frobisher had dealings with him? Remington let out a humorless chuckle. I don't believe, Captain Hastings. I know. Poirot studied him. And yet, you say nothing until now. Remington's lips pressed into a thin line. Because it doesn't matter anymore. Albert's dead. Poirot leaned forward slightly. Or so we are meant to believe. Remington stiffened. What are you suggesting? Poirot's voice remained calm, yet there was steel beneath it. That Albert Frobisher, in his final days, realized he had made a grave error, that he wished to escape LaSalle, and perhaps, just perhaps, he paid the ultimate price for trying. A silence stretched between them. Finally, Remington said, If that's the case, Mr. Poirot, then you're already too late, because no one escapes Victor LaSalle. Poirot stood, adjusting his coat. Non, monsieur. But there is always one thing a man like LaSalle cannot control. Remington arched a brow. And what's that? Poirot's eyes gleamed. The truth. The room fell into uneasy quiet. Outside, the city hummed with life, but within these walls, the shadow of a man long thought buried had begun to stir once more. The night air was cool and damp as Poirot and Hastings stepped out of Remington's townhouse. The street was quiet, save for the occasional echo of distant footsteps. Hastings pulled his coat tighter. I don't like this business, Poirot. If what Remington says is true, we're dealing with dangerous men. Poirot nodded thoughtfully. Oui, mon ami. And when dangerous men feel their secrets are at risk, they become most watchful. Hastings hesitated, then glanced over his shoulder. Speaking of which, I could swear we're being followed. Poirot's expression remained composed, but his voice lowered. You have sharp instincts, Hastings. We have been followed since we left Remington's house. Hastings stiffened. You knew? Poirot smiled. But of course, the rhythm of footsteps, mon cher. Our pursuer walks when we walk, slows when we slow, not the gait of an ordinary pedestrian. Hastings swallowed. What do we do? Poirot adjusted his gloves. We do nothing, yet. A man who follows in shadows wishes to remain unseen. Let us allow him to believe he is unseen, n'est-ce pas? They continued at a steady pace, turning down a narrower street. Poirot's voice was barely above a whisper. And when the time is right, Hastings, we shall see who watches the great Hercule Poirot. Upon returning to his lodging, Poirot wasted no time retrieving the financial documents he had acquired earlier. Hastings, still glancing toward the window as if expecting their pursuer to appear, sighed and sank into a chair. I don't see how bank records will help us now, Poirot. Poirot merely lifted a finger. Patience, mon ami. He skimmed the figures with precision, his brow furrowing ever so slightly. Then, with a quiet murmur, he set the documents down. Most interesting. Hastings leaned forward. What is? Poirot tapped the page. Monsieur Albert Frobisher, a man of wealth and means, had precisely nothing in his accounts at the time of his supposed death. Hastings frowned. He was broke. Poirot shook his head. No, mon ami. A man is broke when he has lost his money. This was deliberate. The accounts were emptied in the days leading up to his funeral. Hastings' eyes widened. So he was planning to run? Poirot's expression darkened. Perhaps. Or perhaps Hastings, someone ensured that when Albert Frobisher was laid to rest, he took none of his fortune with him. A knock at the door interrupted them. Hastings rose, but Poirot held up a hand. Allow me, mon ami. He opened the door. There was no visitor, only a small envelope, placed neatly on the floor. Poirot picked it up, his fingers running over the seal. His gaze was unreadable as he turned it over and carefully slit it open. Inside was a single photograph. Hastings peered over Poirot's shoulder. Good Lord. The photograph was grainy, taken from a distance, but the figure in it was unmistakable. Albert Frobisher, clad in a dark overcoat, walking through what appeared to be a train station. Poirot studied it for a long moment before speaking. This was taken yesterday. Hastings let out a breath. Poirot. That's impossible. Poirot's fingers tightened slightly around the edges of the photograph. Non, Hastings. It is most possible. He turned the image over. Scrawled in ink on the back was a single line. You are looking in the wrong grave. Hastings paled. What the devil does that mean? Poirot carefully placed the photograph on the table. His voice, when he spoke, was quiet, but laced with undeniable certainty. It means, Hastings, that our mystery is only beginning. Chapter 4. The Second Body. The waters of the Thames had always carried secrets, but on this particular morning, it offered up a revelation most disturbing. Scotland Yard had been summoned to a desolate stretch of the riverbank where a bloated corpse had been dragged ashore. The gathered officers spoke in hushed tones, but when Inspector Japp arrived, his usual gruffness was tempered with unease. Poirot, he greeted, barely concealing his exasperation. You always seem to appear when the devil's work is afoot. Poirot inclined his head. Ah, mon cher Japp, it is not that I seek out mysteries, but that mysteries seek out Hercule Poirot. His gaze fell to the body, draped in a sheet, and his voice softened. And what have we here? Japp motioned to a constable, who hesitated before pulling back the cloth. Hastings inhaled sharply. Good heavens! It's Albert Frobisher! The face was unmistakable, despite the water's toll. Albert Frobisher, whom they had buried just days before, lay before them once more. Japp's expression was grim. I had my men check. There's no mistake. This man's been dead no more than 2 days. Poirot's eyes darkened. Then, mon ami, the question is clear. Who was it that we buried before? The medical examiner, a thin, bespectacled man with a precise manner, confirmed what Japp had already suspected. This man has been dead for no more than 48 hours, he stated, glancing at his report. Cause of death appears to be blunt force trauma to the head, likely inflicted before he entered the water. Hastings frowned. But how can that be? We attended his funeral. Poirot nodded. Indeed. Which means the man who lay in the coffin was not Albert Frobisher. His death, his burial. It was all a deception, a performance played with the greatest of care. Japp ran a hand down his face. Then where does that leave us? If this is Frobisher, we need to know who was buried in his place. Poirot's gaze was sharp. Oui, and to answer that, mon cher Japp, there is only one course of action. Japp sighed. Let me guess. Exhumation. Poirot steepled his fingers. It is the only way to reveal the truth, n'est-ce pas? The cemetery had not changed since the day of the funeral, though the grave they had stood beside now held a darker significance. With Scotland Yard's approval, the exhumation was conducted under the solemn watch of Poirot, Hastings, and Japp. The gravediggers worked in near silence, their expressions uneasy. As the coffin was carefully lifted from the earth, Poirot's keen gaze never wavered. Proceed, messieurs, he instructed softly. The lid was pried open, and Hastings felt a chill creep over him as he peered inside. The body that lay within was not Albert Frobisher. It was a man of similar build, but his features were unfamiliar, his clothes ill-fitting. Mon Dieu, Poirot murmured, eyes narrowing. We have uncovered the greatest trick of all, a body hidden in plain sight. Japp exhaled sharply. Who the devil is this? Poirot's gaze swept the figure, taking in every detail. Then he pointed. Observe, Japp. The hands, scarred, rough. This was no businessman. This was a man accustomed to a different kind of work. Japp's eyes narrowed. You mean criminal work? Poirot straightened. I mean, mon cher, that our second dead man may be the key to understanding why Albert Frobisher had to die at all. As the body was examined further, Poirot gestured to the corpse's forearm. A faded but unmistakable tattoo, a serpent coiled around a dagger, marked the skin. Japp's eyes widened. I know that symbol. That's the mark of La Main Noire, a criminal syndicate that operates in smuggling and extortion. Hastings let out a breath. Then Albert Frobisher was tangled up in something much worse than we imagined. Poirot nodded. Oui. This man, whoever he was placed in the coffin to mask Albert's true fate. But the question remains, did Albert orchestrate this deception, or was he its victim? Japp scowled. Either way, someone went to great lengths to cover their tracks. Poirot adjusted his cuffs. Indeed, mon cher Japp. And yet, the truth, it has a most inconvenient habit of surfacing, just as this body did in the Thames. He turned, his expression unreadable. We must now ask ourselves, who benefits most from a dead man walking? The silence that followed was thick with implications. The case of Albert Frobisher was no longer about mere deception. It had become a game of life and death, with the true mastermind still lurking in the shadows. Edwin Frobisher sat stiffly in the drawing room, his fingers drumming impatiently against the armrest. His expression was carefully controlled, but Poirot detected a slight tremor in his jaw, a sign of either anger or unease. You must understand, Monsieur Poirot, Edwin said, his voice clipped. My brother was a complicated man, reclusive, secretive. He lived a life few understood.
Poirot raised an eyebrow. And by this, you mean to imply he led a double life? Edwin exhaled sharply. What other conclusion can we draw? A secret apartment, dealings with criminals, and now 2 bodies connected to him. If you ask me, Albert was not the victim you make him out to be. He was involved in something far beyond our comprehension. Hastings frowned. And yet, Monsieur Frobisher, it is your brother who has ended up dead. Twice. Edwin's jaw tightened. Perhaps, but that does not mean he was innocent. Poirot studied him for a long moment, then murmured, Or perhaps, monsieur, it is precisely because he was innocent that he is now dead. Edwin flinched, just slightly, but Poirot caught it. He leaned forward. Tell me, monsieur, does it not trouble you that a man so cunning as you describe him left behind no contingency plan, no escape route? Edwin hesitated. Poirot's voice softened. Or is it more likely that someone ensured he would never have the chance to flee? A silence settled between them. Poirot, satisfied, adjusted his cuffs. Come, Hastings. There is more to uncover yet. The discovery of the passport was a revelation that sent ripples through the investigation. It had been found tucked inside Albert Frobisher's locked desk, pristine, untouched, but entirely damning. Poirot turned it over in his hands, his fingers tracing the embossed cover. Interesting, no? Hastings frowned. It certainly suggests he was planning to flee. Does it? Poirot's voice was mild. Or does it merely appear so? Japp, standing beside them, scoffed. Come on, Poirot. The man had a secret passport under a false name. What else could it mean? Poirot carefully opened the document. Observe, mon cher Japp. The ink on the stamps, too fresh. The photograph, slightly misaligned. And here, he tapped the edge of the page. A smudge where an original signature was erased. Hastings stiffened. You mean it's forged? Poirot smiled thinly. Precisely, and forged most recently. He closed the passport with a quiet snap. Tell me, mes amis, why would a man with such resources forge his own escape papers after he had already disappeared? Japp scowled. So someone planted it? Poirot nodded. Planted it, to mislead us, to make us believe Albert was a fugitive rather than a target. Hastings exhaled. Then whoever did this wanted to ensure Albert had no one looking for him. Poirot's voice was quiet but certain. Non, mon ami. They wanted to ensure that when we found him, dead, it would seem like justice rather than murder. Poirot stood before the fireplace, his gaze fixed on the flickering embers. Hastings watched him, knowing that look well, the look of a man piecing together a puzzle only he could see. Albert Frobisher, Poirot murmured, was a man who knew too much, and a man who knows too much is most inconvenient to those who wish to remain in the shadows. Hastings leaned forward. Then you believe he was silenced? Poirot's fingers steepled. Not only silenced, Hastings, carefully, deliberately erased. His accounts emptied, his burial a deception, a second corpse planted to confuse the trail. This was not mere murder, it was orchestration. Japp let out a low breath. So we're dealing with someone powerful. Poirot nodded. Oui, mon cher, someone who does not make mistakes, someone who ensured Albert Frobisher was not merely killed, but erased. A pause. Poirot's gaze lifted, sharp and knowing. And yet, mon ami, they have made one mistake. Hastings blinked. What mistake is that? Poirot smiled, his voice quiet but full of certainty. They underestimated me. Chapter 5. The mastermind's web. Poirot sat in quiet contemplation, his fingertips pressed together, as Hastings paced the length of the room. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting flickering patterns against the bookshelves. This Victor LaSalle, Hastings muttered, his brow furrowed. It seems every trail we follow leads back to him. Poirot nodded slowly. Oui, mon ami. And yet he is a man of shadows, a name spoken in hushed tones, never written, never traced. Such men do not reveal themselves easily. Japp, seated across from them, grunted. Because men like LaSalle don't need to be seen to be dangerous. You don't find him, he finds you. Poirot's gaze sharpened. Precisely, mon cher Japp. And yet he has revealed something, though he does not realize it. Japp raised an eyebrow. And what's that? Poirot leaned forward. That Albert Frobisher was of value to him, that his death was not merely a matter of convenience, but necessity. Hastings frowned. But why? What did Albert have that LaSalle wanted? Poirot adjusted his cuffs. That, Hastings, is the question we must answer. And to do so, we must follow the path of all men who become inconvenient to those in power. We must follow the money. The solicitor's office smelled of old paper and ink, its shelves lined with neatly stacked legal tomes. Mr. Alistair Graves, the family lawyer, removed his spectacles and sighed. I had hoped, Mr. Poirot, that this business would not trouble me further. Poirot offered a polite smile. And yet, Monsieur Graves, business has a way of remaining troublesome when one buries a man who was not truly dead. Graves hesitated, then retrieved a stack of documents from his desk. Mr. Frobisher's will is rather unorthodox. Hastings leaned forward. Unorthodox how? Graves slid the document across the table. A week before his first death, Mr. Frobisher made a sudden amendment. Should anything happen to him, a significant portion of his estate was to be transferred to one Victor LaSalle. A silence settled over the room. Hastings exhaled. So, LaSalle had a financial stake in this after all. Poirot's fingers brushed the document lightly. Non, Hastings. This is not mere inheritance. This is leverage. He looked up at Graves. Tell me, monsieur, was Albert forced to sign this under duress? Graves hesitated. I cannot say for certain, but he was different that day. Nervous, he barely spoke, only asked if the changes could be enacted quickly. Poirot's voice was quiet but firm. Then he knew, mon ami, he knew that death was coming for him. The night air was thick with mist as Hastings made his way back from the solicitor's office. The gas lamps flickered weakly, casting long, wavering shadows on the cobblestone streets. He quickened his pace, the uneasy sensation of being watched creeping up his spine. Then he heard it, the whisper of footsteps behind him. Hastings turned sharply, but the street behind him was empty. The alleyways loomed dark and silent. He exhaled, shaking his head. Nerves, he muttered. I'm letting Poirot's suspicions get to me. He took another step. A sharp blow struck his shoulder, sending him stumbling into the damp brick wall. Before he could react, a second strike landed against his ribs, knocking the breath from his lungs. A voice, low and menacing, growled in his ear. Tell the little detective to stop digging. The dead should stay buried. Then, just as suddenly as it began, The weight lifted. Hastings gasped, clutching his side, but when he turned, his attacker had vanished into the night. Shaken but furious, he staggered toward Poirot's lodging. He burst through the door, breathless. "Poirot!" he gasped. "Someone just tried to warn us off." Poirot's expression did not change. Calmly, he gestured toward a chair. "Sit, Hastings." Hastings blinked. "But didn't you hear me? I was attacked." Poirot nodded. "Oui, mon ami. And now we are certain." "Certain of what?" Poirot's voice was like steel. "That we are very close to the truth indeed." The Frobisher estate was dark and silent when Poirot and Hastings arrived. The butler, a thin, grave-faced man, led them to a dimly lit sitting room where Miss Langley, the housekeeper, sat wringing her hands. Her eyes flickered nervously toward Edwin Frobisher's study, as though fearing she might be overheard. "I shouldn't be speaking to you, Mr. Poirot," she whispered. "If Mr. Edwin finds out—" Poirot raised a hand. "Mademoiselle, you have nothing to fear. The truth, it has a way of revealing itself, non." Miss Langley swallowed hard. I wasn't honest with you before. Mr. Albert, he wasn't just ill before he died. He was terrified. He kept the curtains drawn, barely slept, said he was being watched." Hastings frowned. "Watched? By whom?" She shook her head. "I don't know. But the day before the funeral, he told me something strange. He said, 'If anything happens to me, do not trust the will. It's not what it seems.'" Poirot's gaze sharpened. "And yet, mademoiselle, you said nothing." Tears welled in her eyes. "I was afraid. But now, after what happened at the grave, I can't keep silent any longer." Poirot nodded solemnly. "Bon. Then tell me, Miss Langley, what was it that Albert Frobisher feared most?" She hesitated, then whispered, "Someone in this very house." Miss Langley's hands trembled as she reached into the folds of her dress and produced a small brass key. "Mr. Albert gave this to me the night before he disappeared." Poirot took the key delicately. "And what does it open, mademoiselle?" She exhaled shakily. "His private study. Mr. Edwin doesn't know it exists. It's hidden behind the library shelves." A moment later, they stood before the great oak bookshelves. Miss Langley pressed a panel, and with a faint click, a section of books swung inward, revealing a narrow doorway. Hastings let out a low whistle. A hidden room? What the devil was Albert hiding? Inside, the study was small but orderly. A writing desk, an empty safe, and stacks of neatly filed documents lined the walls. Poirot ran a finger over the desk. Then his eyes fell upon a single sheet of paper left exposed. He picked it up and read aloud. "One name holds the key, Victor LaSalle."
Hastings stiffened. "So, Albert knew about LaSalle?" Poirot nodded. Not only knew Hastings, he was trying to escape him. He moved to the safe and examined the lock. "See here?" It was forced open. "Someone else has been here already." Miss Langley let out a quiet gasp. Then whoever wanted him dead has already taken what they needed." Poirot turned to her, his expression unreadable. "Not everything, mademoiselle. They have left behind the most valuable thing of all, their mistake." Poirot folded the note carefully and tucked it into his pocket. Then, with a quiet certainty, he turned to Hastings. "We have all the pieces, mon ami. The time has come to set the trap." Hastings frowned. "A trap?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "But of course, a murderer, he is like the spider. He weaves his web, thinking himself unseen. But when the right thread is plucked, he cannot resist but come forth to see who dares disturb his work." Miss Langley shivered. And what will you do, Mr. Poirot?" Poirot smiled, but there was steel beneath it. "I shall do what I do best, mademoiselle. I shall reveal the truth." He turned to Hastings. "Send word to all the key players, Edwin Frobisher, Remington, Japp, and Miss Langley. Tell them to meet me here at midnight. For then, my dear Hastings, we shall unmask our spider." The clock ticked softly in the corner, the weight of the moment settling over them. The game was nearly at its end, and Poirot was ready to make his final move. Chapter 6. The Midnight Revelation. The Frobisher estate had never seemed so cold, nor had its great hall ever felt so oppressive. The heavy chandeliers flickered weakly, casting elongated shadows across the room where the assembled guests sat in tense silence. Hercule Poirot stood before them, his expression composed but resolute. Hastings, seated to his right, studied the room carefully. Inspector Japp leaned against the fireplace, his arms crossed, his watchful eyes taking in every movement. Before them sat Edwin Frobisher, his posture rigid, his lips pressed into a thin line. Beside him, Mr. Remington adjusted his cuffs, a flicker of discomfort betraying his usual composed demeanour. Miss Langley, pale and withdrawn, clutched her handkerchief. "Ladies and gentlemen," Poirot began, his voice calm but commanding, "we have been brought here this evening to unravel a deception most elaborate, a deception so cunning that it nearly succeeded in burying the truth forever." His gaze swept the room. "But Hercule Poirot, he does not let the truth remain buried. Not," Edwin scoffed. "Is this really necessary, Poirot? My brother is dead, and Scotland Yard has its investigation." Poirot lifted a finger. "Ah, but which brother, Monsieur Frobisher? For that is the question, is it not?" A murmur of unease rippled through the room. Poirot clasped his hands behind his back. "Let us begin, mes amis, with the deception of the first burial." Poirot turned toward the fireplace, his voice quiet but deliberate. "The man we buried that day was not Albert Frobisher." Miss Langley let out a gasp, while Hastings straightened in his chair. Edwin's fingers tightened around the armrest. "A lie!" Edwin snapped. "Preposterous!" Poirot lifted a hand. "Ah, but it is not preposterous, mon cher. Consider, Albert Frobisher was a man of wealth, a man whose name carried influence. Yet when he was declared dead, did anyone truly examine the body?" Hastings hesitated. "Now that you mention it, Poirot, there was very little time for anyone to view the remains properly." Poirot nodded. "Precisely. And the reason for this? Because the corpse that lay in that coffin was not Albert Frobisher, but rather a drifter, a man plucked from the streets to serve as a decoy, a man whose death would raise no suspicions." Remington let out a sharp breath. "But why? Who would go to such lengths?" Poirot's expression darkened. "Why, Monsieur Remington? Because Albert Frobisher himself orchestrated the deception." Gasps erupted around the room. "Yes, mes amis," Poirot continued, "Albert Frobisher planned to disappear, but alas his plan, it did not succeed." Poirot stepped forward, his voice unwavering. "Albert Frobisher knew he was in danger. He had discovered something, a secret so great that it made him a target. He wished to vanish before those who sought to silence him could act. And so he created an illusion, an empty coffin, a false corpse." Miss Langley's hands trembled. "But if he planned to escape, why did he end up in the Thames?" Poirot nodded. "Ah, an excellent question, mademoiselle. You see, Albert was clever, but he was not careful enough. His deception almost succeeded, but someone close to him, discovered the truth before he could flee." His gaze fell on Edwin, whose expression remained impassive. "Albert was murdered before he could disappear," Poirot said softly. "His body disposed of in the river, where it was never meant to be found." Japp's voice cut through the silence. "And you believe that person is in this room, Poirot?" Poirot's voice was like steel. "I do not believe, mon cher Japp. I know." A thick silence hung over the hall. Poirot's gaze was fixed upon Edwin, whose jaw was now set in defiance. "Edwin Frobisher," Poirot announced, "it is you who orchestrated your brother's true death." Edwin scoffed. "Ridiculous. Why would I kill my own brother?" Poirot smiled thinly. "Ah, but that is simple, is it not? Greed, power, the inheritance. You knew that if Albert disappeared, his wealth would remain tied up in legal disputes. But if he were truly dead, if you could ensure it, then you, as his only living heir, would inherit everything. Hastings' eyes widened. So Edwin killed Albert before he could escape. Poirot nodded. Oui, Hastings. He intercepted Albert, perhaps at his secret apartment, and ended his life. Then, with the help of his accomplices, he disposed of the body, hoping no one would ever find it. Miss Langley gasped. And the will! He must have known about the forged document. Edwin's fists clenched. You have no proof. Poirot sighed. Ah, mais non. I have every proof. The altered will, the empty accounts, the forged passport meant to paint Albert as a fugitive. But your greatest mistake, mon cher, was underestimating the river. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Bodies rise, Edwin, and so did your secret. Edwin's mask cracked. His breathing quickened. Poirot watched him with quiet satisfaction. You knew Albert had planned to run, Poirot continued. You knew because you had been watching him. The moment he attempted his escape, you were there. And yet, in your haste, you overlooked one crucial detail. Edwin swallowed hard. And what is that? Poirot smiled. A man who fakes his death leaves behind no body. A man who is murdered, however, will always be found. Hastings exhaled. Albert's body was never supposed to resurface, but it did. Japp stepped forward. And that's when you panicked, isn't it, Edwin? When you knew the game was up. Edwin's hands clenched into fists. You can't prove I killed him. Poirot tilted his head. Can I not? The will, the accounts, the testimony of Miss Langley, all of it, mon cher, leads to you. Edwin's face twisted. You think you've won? Poirot merely folded his arms. Mais oui, Monsieur Frobisher, and now, so has justice. There was a moment of stillness. Then, Edwin moved. With a sudden burst of desperation, he leapt from his chair and bolted toward the doorway. Stop him! Hastings shouted. But Poirot did not move. Instead, he merely smiled as Edwin reached the entrance, only to come face to face with two uniformed officers. Japp exhaled. Ah, you called them already, didn't you, Poirot? Poirot straightened his cuffs. But of course, mon ami. The truth, it does not wait for criminals to confess. Edwin's shoulders sagged. Damn you, Poirot, he spat. Poirot merely shook his head. Non, monsieur. Damn yourself. As the officers led Edwin away, Miss Langley exhaled a shuddering breath. It's over. Poirot smiled gently. Oui, mademoiselle, the web has been untangled. The great hall fell silent. The case was closed, and Albert Frobisher, at last, could rest in peace. Chapter 7. The final burying of the truth. As the heavy doors of the Frobisher estate closed behind Edwin, led away in handcuffs, a silence settled over the grand hall. Poirot remained standing at the centre of the room, his gaze thoughtful. The case was complete, or nearly so. Hastings exhaled, running a hand through his hair. Well, Poirot, I must admit, I don't know how you keep all these details in that extraordinary head of yours. Poirot smiled faintly. Ah, mon ami, it is the order of things. A crime, it is like a puzzle, 1,000 pieces scattered across the table. But the pieces, they always fit, if one has the patience to see them for what they are. Japp adjusted his coat. I still can't believe the lengths Edwin went to. Staging a fake death is one thing, but murdering his own brother to make sure of the inheritance. Poirot steepled his fingers. Oui, Inspector. But he was too confident. He believed his scheme so perfect that no one would ever question the first body. And yet, Albert Frobisher's true death was inevitable, because Edwin overlooked one thing. Miss Langley, still shaken, looked up. What was that, Mr. Poirot? Poirot's eyes gleamed. That the dead do not stay buried forever, not when they leave behind the most dangerous thing of all, the truth. Poirot moved to the writing desk where the unfinished letter had been laid out once more. He smoothed the paper carefully, as though handling something fragile. This, he murmured, was Albert Frobisher's last attempt to escape his fate. Hastings leaned in. It still isn't clear who he was trying to warn. Poirot tapped the letter. Let us recall the words he wrote. I have been a fool. I see that now. There is no one I can trust, not even... He looked up. Albert had finally realized the truth. He had discovered that Edwin was working against him. And in his final moments before his disappearance, he attempted to write the name of his betrayer. Miss Langley's voice trembled. If only he had finished it. Perhaps he would still be alive. Poirot sighed. Perhaps. But a man who fears for his life does not always have the luxury of time. And so, the letter remained unfinished, waiting for the right eyes to see what it truly was. Not a mere note, but a desperate plea for help. Japp shook his head. Too late for him, but not for justice. Poirot folded the letter carefully. Rien ne reste caché pour toujours. Nothing remains hidden forever, Inspector. Not even a crime so carefully buried. The sound of an approaching car broke the silence. The great doors swung open once more, and Scotland Yard officers stepped inside. Edwin Frobisher, his composure now entirely shattered, struggled as they led him toward the waiting vehicle. This is absurd, he spat, his voice desperate. You have no real proof. Just theories spun by a clever little detective. Poirot stepped forward, adjusting his cuffs. Ah, mon cher, but is it not always the case? A murderer, he clings to denial, even as the rope tightens around his neck. Edwin sneered. I could have done it better. I should have been rid of Albert long before he even thought of faking his death. Poirot tilted his head. Ah, and yet, Monsieur Frobisher, the difference between a good plan and a perfect plan is often a single mistake. And you, mon ami, made many. Edwin's shoulders slumped. His fight was over. The officers guided him toward the car, his future now sealed. As the vehicle disappeared into the night, Hastings let out a breath. So that's that then? Poirot clasped his hands behind his back, staring into the distance. Yes, Hastings, the case is closed. The truth has been buried, properly this time. The great house fell silent once more. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, carrying away the last remnants of a deception that had failed. Albert Frobisher was dead, but at last he could rest in peace. It was an odd sight. Miss Langley, the once dutiful housekeeper, sitting in the grand study of the Frobisher estate, now its unexpected mistress. She looked small in the high-backed chair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap as the weight of her new reality settled upon her. Poirot observed her carefully. Mademoiselle, I imagine this is not the outcome you anticipated. Miss Langley shook her head. I never expected this. I only wanted to do what was right, to see justice done. Hastings offered a reassuring smile. And justice has been done, Miss Langley. Edwin's greed cost him everything. But Albert, in the end, he must have trusted you. She exhaled. I looked after him for years, and yet, I never truly knew the depth of his fears. Poirot inclined his head. Fear, mademoiselle, it is a most deceptive thing. It hides in shadows. It whispers in quiet moments. But it cannot be ignored forever. Japp, standing near the fireplace, adjusted his coat. The legal formalities will take time, but the will stands. Edwin is out of the picture. This estate belongs to you now. Miss Langley swallowed. And what am I to do with it? Poirot smiled gently. Whatever you wish, mademoiselle. Perhaps for the first time in your life, you hold the power. She blinked, as if the thought had never occurred to her. Power, she murmured. Strange how it finds its way into the hands of those who never sought it. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Ah, mademoiselle, that, I think, is why you deserve it most of all. Later that evening, Poirot and Hastings sat by the fire in their lodgings. A fresh pot of tea rested on the table, steam curling lazily in the air. Hastings, leaning back in his chair, let out a deep sigh. Well, Poirot, I must say, this case had more twists than I could have ever imagined. Poirot sipped his tea. Oui, Hastings. It was a most intricate tapestry of deception. A man who faked his death only to be murdered for real. An inheritance scheme so carefully woven that it nearly succeeded. And of course, a murderer who believed himself too clever to be caught. Hastings shook his head. And yet, Edwin was careless in the end, wasn't he? Poirot smiled slightly. Ah, mon ami. All murderers are careless in the end. A crime, you see. It is never truly perfect. It leaves behind threads, some frayed, some neatly tucked away, but always there, waiting for the trained eye to see them. Hastings chuckled. And you, Poirot, you never fail to see what others miss. Poirot adjusted his cuffs, a hint of satisfaction in his expression. It is not magic, Hastings. It is logic, observation, and above all, patience. The truth. It reveals itself only to those who wait for it. Hastings leaned forward. And yet, Poirot, tell me honestly, was there ever a moment when you doubted your conclusion? Poirot's eyes twinkled. Non, mon ami. I doubted only that others would see what I saw. The truth, Hastings, is often most difficult to believe when it is standing right before one's eyes. Hastings nodded, taking a sip of his tea. Well, I'll give you this, old chap. It was quite the spectacle. Poirot chuckled. Ah, but of course, Hastings. After all, what is life without a touch of drama? The clock chimed softly as Hastings leaned back, staring into the fire, lost in thought. You know, Poirot, he mused, cases like this, they stay with you. A man who should have been dead but wasn't. A murderer who thought he was untouchable. And then, at the end of it all, the dead rising to speak once more. Poirot arched an eyebrow. You grow philosophical, Hastings. Hastings smiled faintly. It's just, well, do you ever wonder? About spirits? Ghosts? The way the past refuses to stay buried? Poirot set down his teacup with precision. Ghosts? Hastings? He gave a small, amused smile. Non, mon ami, I do not believe in ghosts. Hastings raised an eyebrow. Oh? Not at all. Poirot's smile deepened. He leaned in slightly, lowering his voice just a fraction. Only the ones we bury twice, Hastings. A chill ran through Hastings. For a moment, neither man spoke. Then Poirot sat back, adjusting his cuffs once more, and reached for his tea. Now, he said lightly, shall we discuss something more cheerful? Perhaps breakfast tomorrow? I am most particular about my eggs, you know. Hastings let out a chuckle, shaking his head. Poirot, sometimes I wonder if anything unsettles you. Poirot merely smiled. Only bad tea, Hastings, and an unpolished shoe. Outside, the London streets stretched into the night, silent and watchful. The case of Albert Frobisher had come to its end, its secrets unearthed, its ghosts finally laid to rest. But somewhere, in the depths of the city, another mystery was waiting, and Hercule Poirot, ever the seeker of truth, would be ready when it called. Thank you for tuning in to Mind Sherlock. If you enjoyed this mind-bending mystery, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon to stay updated on more thrilling detective adventures. Your support keeps the stories flowing and the mysteries unraveling. We'd love to hear your thoughts. How did you find this story? If you have any suggestions or theories, feel free to share them in the comments below. Your input keeps the mystery alive.